Thank you for choosing to work with dogs at San Diego Humane Society. My name is Shannon Feeney, and I'm a behavior and training coordinator and a member of our behavior and training department. And I'm here to teach you today about swag, manners for life, and skills for the real world. So what is swag exactly? Swag is a collection of behaviors and a learning concept that can and should be taught to our shelter dogs by all of us to improve their adaptability by teaching them useful skills, to decrease their length of stay by teaching specific behaviors, to provide them with mental stimulation by engaging them in training games, and generally speaking, to make them less challenging and more delightful for everyone to handle. This includes staff, volunteers, and their future families. So what is SWAG exactly? Well, SWAG is an acronym. SWAG stands for sit, a behavior, wait, also a behavior, attend, a collection of behaviors, and generalize, a learning concept. Let's take a look at that sit. A sit is when a dog takes their rear and places it on the ground. And in the case of swag, this is when given a cue. Now, sit is a quick and crucial skill. This is often the very first thing that every potential adopter is quizzing, quote unquote, our dogs on. Our adopters, generally speaking, like to see that our dogs know a thing or two, and this is the very first behavior they're going to try to cue with a verbal cue or a visual cue. And sit is incompatible with a variety of other less desirable behaviors. This means that when a dog is sitting, there's a collection of other behaviors that they simply can't be doing because they can't do them at the same time. This includes jumping, pulling on leash, and sometimes mouthing. These are a collection of less desirable behaviors that we don't want to teach our dogs. So let's learn about how to teach a sit. In this video, this is Chris working with Tornado, a dog who's going to learn how to sit through a luring method. Now, Chris has treats in that hand you see out in front of him. He's going to take that hand with treats in it. He's going to place it directly in front of Tornado's nose, and he's going to arc his hand back up and over his head toward his shoulders until Tornado naturally falls into a seated position. And as soon as Tornado falls into a seated position, Chris is going to release a treat from his hand to reinforce that behavior. There it is. And one more time. There it is again. Notice that when Chris starts luring, he has his hand a little bit too high, so he makes a quick correction and lowers his hand down as to not encourage Tornado to jump up by keeping his hand at a lower angle right in front of Tornado's nose and arcing back and over his head. He's able to keep his feet on the floor and lure him into a seated position. Here's another video example of myself and a dog named Dandelion. And I'm using the same method, a luring method. I have treats in that hand that you see there, right in front of her nose. And I'm going to arc my hand back up and over her head and shoulders. And she's going to naturally fall into a seated position. And then I'm going to release my treat to reinforce this behavior. Notice this takes a few seconds. She gets that treat, and that sit behavior has been reinforced. So some tips and troubleshooting for teaching sit. Remember, use treats, use a lure, and keep the treats very close to the dog's nose at a low angle. Arc your hand up and over their head and shoulders, and as soon as their rear hits the ground, immediately deliver the treat to reinforce that behavior. To put this behavior on cue, say sit first and before you do anything else. So say sit, grab a treat, lure, and release your treat when your dog's rear hits the ground. With enough time and repetition, your dog is going to do what's called jumping the prompt. And they're going to associate you saying sit with you luring them into a seated position. And they're going to jump that prompt and start offering sit as soon as you say sit. Keep in mind, there's also an opportunity here to diversify the way that you reinforce this behavior. Treats are not the only way to teach behaviors and also not the only things that reinforce behavior. There are a lot of opportunities in things that we do day to day, events that we can take advantage of that are reinforcing the behaviors that are happening just before them. A few examples of this are raising a divider door because that predicts that you will be removing that dog from their kennel, which is reinforcing. Another example is entering a kennel, putting on a leash, removing a leash in a play yard, or tossing a toy in a play yard. All of these events and actions that we take are reinforcing. So cue a sit before you do any of these things, and you will be diversifying the way that you reinforce this behavior and generally making your dog better at it by practicing it in different contexts. Wait. This is our next behavior in swag, and a wait is when a dog pauses at a doorway or a gate. And wait is a valuable behavior because it teaches our dogs to pause and check in with us at gates and doorways, which generally speaking is going to make moving through the shelter safer for everyone. This will make things safer for people, opening doors and moving through them while also managing a dog on a leash with one hand. And also, this will make the shelter a safer place for the people and dogs on the other side of that door. A dog who pushes, pulls, and charges through doorways and gates can be challenging to manage in one hand with a leash and while navigating your environment by opening gates and doors in the other. So let's take a look at how to teach a wait. Now this is me and a dog, and this dog is learning to wait at a doorway. This dog doesn't have a sit yet, so I'm teaching this behavior without a sit, and he's doing it in a standing position. Now keep in mind, a wait is simply a natural pause or a 2 to 3 second pause at a doorway or gate. A dog can do this in a standing position, a seated position, and with or without eye contact. Here we are. Pauses for 2 to 3 seconds and stands there while I adjust my leash. And then I open the door and I'm reinforcing that pause in a standing position before I move through that door, because moving through that door and out into the world for a walk is reinforcing. Here's another example. This is a really excitable dog who's learning to wait in a seated position because he knows a sit. He's clearly very excited if you pay attention to his body language to move outside. He sits after I cue it. He pops up and I pause and refrain from opening that door while he pops up and jumps on it. He folds back into a sit, and then I open the door while he's sitting to reinforce that behavior. And that was a brief 2-second pause at that doorway. So tips and troubleshooting for teaching a wait. Remember, this behavior is taught without treats. Moving through a door or a gate is the reward. If a dog does not know a sit or is too over-aroused to respond to a sit cue, just wait for them to be standing quietly for quick 1 to 2, maybe even 3 seconds, and you can come back and teach a sit later. The bare minimum for teaching a wait is that a dog is standing still with all of their paws on the floor for 2 to maybe 3 seconds. Wait is often the most time-consuming part of teaching swag. For some dogs who are really aroused or excited, it may take even a full minute or two the first couple times you start practicing this behavior to get it before you move through doors and gates. But keep in mind, the more you practice this, the more we all practice teaching this behavior, the quicker the time it takes for your dog to offer this behavior, or the less time, it will take less time for your dog to offer this behavior as you're moving through gates and doorways. Attend. And attend is a couple behaviors. So attend is when a dog checks in and makes eye contact with their handler. So this might involve pausing, standing, and turning towards you or orienting towards you and making eye contact. Attending is all about building connection. We want our dogs to learn to view us or see us, their handlers and caregivers, as well worth paying attention to. Eye contact connects us to our dogs, and it may make them more likely to approach and engage with us or others. And orienting toward a person and offering eye contact is also incompatible with a number of other behaviors. This includes looking at other things that may excite or arouse your dog, or looking at other dogs and people and becoming reactive if your dog is reactive. If your dog is making eye contact with you, they may be less likely to become excited or over-aroused by looking at other things that are exciting or arousing. And if your dog is looking at you, they can't be looking at other dogs or people on leash and becoming quote unquote reactive. So let's take a look at how to teach a dog to attend to us. This is myself, and I'm working with Joey here. And Joey is learning to make eye contact in a standing position because he doesn't have a sit yet before we move through doors and gates. So I'm going to pause here when we get to the doorway, and I'm going to wait. Joey's pretty good at this. One of his first thoughts is to look at the door, and then he looks up at me. And as soon as he does that, let's watch this one more time. I pop the door open to reinforce that behavior. There he is, he looks at me, makes eye contact, and out we go. So standing with eye contact was reinforced in this video because it happened before I opened the door. In this next video, we're in a play yard. We're exiting the play yard. He needs a second to sniff something. Pause at the gate, he looks at me, and I open the gate and we move through. Let's watch that one more time. Joey's pretty good at this. I'm waiting for him at the gate. Pause. He looks up at me, makes eye contact, and as soon as he does that, I open the gate and the standing with eye contact behavior is reinforced. Now, this is a dog we saw in an earlier video, a dog named Dandelion and myself. And Dandelion is clearly excited and pulling towards something. She's actually pulling towards the person that is filming this video to greet them. And Dandelion, I use here a prompt to prompt Dandelion to make eye contact with me so that I can reinforce it. So what I do is I make a kissy noise with my lips as she's pulling away from me. And as she turns to face me and makes eye contact, I reinforce that behavior with a treat. So this is just another way to teach attending. She's facing me, she's making eye contact, and she's getting a treat. And in this case, I'm using the treat to reinforce that behavior, and I'm prompting the eye contact by making a kissy noise with my mouth. Tips and troubleshooting for attending. Now, remember what you're really reinforcing here is eye contact. The dog's going to turn their head toward you, maybe even their body, and they're going to have their eyes meet yours. And as soon as that happens, offer reinforcement. This can be opening a door, opening a gate, or doing any other number of things that are reinforcing. Practice this in front of the kennel, on walks, in play yards, everywhere. The more you practice this and the more places that you practice this behavior, generally speaking, the better our dogs are going to be at it. You can encourage dogs to offer eye contact if they don't offer it naturally by using an orienting sound, which is what I used in the video you saw with Dandelion, where I made a kissy noise with my mouth. This caused her to look at me and make eye contact, and then I reinforced that behavior. And again here, another opportunity to diversify your reinforcers. So wait for eye contact or prompt eye contact before doing things that are reinforcing, like opening up a divider door, opening a door or gate, before putting on a leash, or before tossing a toy in a play yard. All of these things are reinforcing. So the behaviors that are happening before we do them are going to be reinforced. Generalize. Generalize is not a behavior, but it is a learning concept. And in the case of swag, the generalization process, or when swag has generalized, a dog is going to be reliably sitting for, waiting with, and attending to new people in new places. And generalization, by definition, is the tendency to respond in the same way to different but similar stimuli. So, waiting at a kennel door can generalize, if practiced enough, to waiting at an adopter's front door. And looking attentively at a staff member or a volunteer at kennel front can generalize to making eye contact with a guest that could possibly become an adopter. And checking in with a volunteer on a walk can generalize to a dog engaging with an adopter on a walk around their new neighborhood. So, what do you have to do to make sure that generalization happens? All you have to do is just keep practicing. Sit, wait, and attend in every situation and every environment, and it will generalize all by itself. When we make a habit of having our dogs sit, wait, and attend, these behaviors become a habit for our dogs too. So show us your swag. We want to see you practicing these behaviors all of the time. We want to see you teaching dogs sit. We want to see you waiting for that wait. And we want to see you teaching dogs to check in with you, look at you, turn towards you, and make eye contact. Incorporate these behaviors and teaching them into your day-to-day interactions with our dogs, and show us your swag. Now, a quick FAQ. These are just some common questions that we've received when giving this presentation. One of the most common questions that we have received is whether or not you should use a verbal marker. This is a good question. And I would say a verbal marker is optional. What's nice about a verbal marker is that it's very specific. A verbal marker like yes or yep can be used to mark a behavior before you offer reinforcement. Verbal markers operate a bit like clickers do, in that it's a very specific and consistent sound that can be used to mark specific behaviors just prior to the offering of reinforcement. So maybe if you're teaching a sit, or you're teaching eye contact, if you have a dog that's moving around really, really quickly and really active, and they're doing lots of other behaviors, that make it difficult maybe for you to capture and mark really specifically whatever it is you're working on, be it eye contact or sit. A verbal marker could be helpful here, but you don't have to use one. What we want our dogs to learn when we're using swag is to associate these behaviors with people, right? And specific situations. So sitting at doors and waiting at doors, sitting at gates and waiting at gates, you don't need to use a verbal marker for these. But you can if you need to be really specific and you have a dog that's moving around a lot and doing a lot of other behaviors. Another question that we frequently get asked is verbal praise enough to use as reinforcement? And generally speaking, I would say that this depends on the relationship that this dog has with verbal praise and maybe even the person who is praising the dog. Verbal praise is what's called a secondary reinforcer. There are two types of reinforcers: primary, which are things that are reinforcing, generally speaking, for almost all dogs. Food falls into that category. And then there are secondary reinforcers, which are reinforcers like verbal praise that develop value by being associated with or paired with primary reinforcers. So, verbal praise from a familiar person or from people can develop value for some dogs. And you'll probably notice, or you've probably noticed, that some dogs seem to respond to verbal praise as if they're experiencing some sort of positive emotion when you talk to them and verbally praise them. So the short answer is it depends. Sometimes verbal praise for some dogs does have a decent amount of value, but generally speaking, it's not going to have inherent value like something like food does for all dogs. And it depends. It depends on your relationship to that dog, and it depends on your dog's relationship with what it is that you're saying and how you're saying it. Another question that we get frequently is, what if I'm in a rush to get something done or to take a dog out to go potty? Should I skip swag? And the answer is no. If you are in a rush to get something done or to get a dog out, say first thing in the morning to go potty, maybe this is the first thing that they're going to the restroom since the night before, this is a really, really good opportunity to practice swag. And generally speaking, our dogs are going to have more swag, and we're going to have more swag if we make a habit of practicing it. Now, one of the reasons that this is a really great, going out for the first time in the morning is a really great opportunity to practice swag is your dog's motivation to go to the bathroom first thing in the morning or to leave their kennel is going to be really high. So whatever happens first thing in the morning while you're retrieving from handling and removing that dog from their kennel, all of those behaviors are going to be reinforced, especially if your dog is really keen on moving out of their kennel. So, swag, realistically, if you are simply looking for eye contact in a standing position or a 2 to 3 second pause at doorways, maybe with eye contact, maybe with a sit, if your dog's really good at it, really shouldn't take you that much time. And this behavior is most valuable if we all make a concerted effort to practice it all of the time and as often as we can. And keep in mind, getting a dog out of their kennel first thing in the morning is a really great opportunity to practice some training, because that's a really, really reinforcing thing to do, is remove your dog from their kennel first thing in the morning when it's been a while since they've been outside. Another question that we frequently get is, how can I use swag if I'm in a hands-off role? This could be a volunteer role or a staff role where maybe you're not directly handling animals. This is another really great question. And if you think about what we've learned here today about swag and teaching some of these behaviors, you can teach these through the front of a kennel. So maybe you're not moving into kennels and handling dogs to remove them from their kennels, but you can still teach them these things. So keep treats on you so you can use treats for these behaviors and teach them through the front of the kennel. A luring method for a sit, so taking a treat in your hand and luring it over the top of a dog's head and back over their shoulders, might be difficult if you're doing this through the front of a kennel, but there are other methods that you can use to teach sit. There is a method called capturing that can be used here because you have a barrier between you and the dog and you can't use a lure very well to teach a sit. So, capturing is essentially waiting for the behavior to happen. So, when you are passing by the fronts of dogs' kennels, keep some treats on you and wait for a sit, or wait for eye contact and then offer a treat. Another thing to keep in mind is if eye contact doesn't happen naturally, you can also use what we learned about today as a prompt to prompt a dog to make eye contact. So remember, you can make a orienting sound, which is a kissy noise with your mouth, or you can use the dog's name. And as soon as they make eye contact, offer a treat through the front of the kennel. So sit and attend can still be taught even if you're in a hands-off role just through the front of a dog's kennel. Our last question is, does swag help dogs get adopted faster? And the short answer is yes. There have been a number of scientific studies that have correlated certain specific behaviors that dogs display in their kennels with quicker adoptions. And one of those behaviors is eye contact. There are a few studies that have concluded that eye contact can decrease length of stay, so the amount of time a dog spends in a shelter, and increased or speed up the adoption process. Also, there's been a number of studies that have studied behaviors that increase length of stay, so that lead to longer lengths of stay and slow adoptions. And some of these behaviors include rubbing against or on the front of a kennel, hanging out at the back of a kennel, or a pacing and a moving back and forth behavior. So swag will also help us teach dogs sitting, waiting, and attending, things that they can do in their kennel, which are behaviors that are not associated with a longer length of stay, while also teaching behaviors like eye contact that are associated with quicker adoptions. So the answer is yes, swag can definitely help get dogs adopted faster. So if you have any future questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email is sfeeney@schumane.org. And if you're a volunteer, connect with a volunteer supervisor through the Volunteer Center at sdhumane.org email group. If you have any questions about any of the material in this PowerPoint, or you're looking for someone who can help you practice and teach these skills, get in contact with myself or a volunteer supervisor through the Volunteer Center at sdhumane.org email. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this presentation, and I look forward to meeting you in the future and seeing your swag.